Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us again for another week live with Dr. McDougall. Only that today we have our special monthly guest, Dr. Doug Lisle. It's always a pleasure and an honor to have him here with us and learn from him. And today we have what a lot of you really enjoy, and it is a general Q&A session, and many of you have submitted questions that I have here. And remember that to submit questions, you've got to send the email to webinar@drmcdougall.com. I'm Gustavo Tolosa, the webinar host, and I want to welcome Dr. Doug Lisle. How are you doing today?
Very well. Good to be here, Gustavo.
Very good. Always very fun to be together with all our friends here. You know, we have been doing this for almost, I think, 2 years now. So I am recognizing a lot of these people that are logging in. Hi, everyone. So, Dr. Lisle, in about 2 weeks, I think we're going to have you as a guest in one of Chef AJ's webinars.
Yes.
That's another opportunity to talk about holiday, surviving the holidays. Okay, so today we have some questions. Are you ready?
Ready to go.
You're ready, okay. So one of the people say, Dr. Lisle, I listened to your excellent presentation on panic attacks. The method to stop them from progressing further makes sense. However, what if you are in a very crowded subway, stuck in a tunnel for 10, 15 minutes or sometimes longer? What do you do then? How can you apply the method of marching or jogging in place when there is either no room to do so, or if there is room, you would look like you're a crazy person?
Right. What you do is you just, you can very easily contract the muscles of your legs, the big muscles, and also you can hold your stomach and tense it up as if someone was going to punch you in the stomach and you're going to get ready for it. And if you do that and you hold that for about 10 seconds, you'll get very tired. The muscles will get tired, and then you let them go. And when you let them go, so I just did it, just the last few seconds, and now what happens is that I need to take a deeper breath. And so in order to catch up, because you burn up a little bit of oxygen by doing this. And so you just keep tensing and relaxing and tensing and relaxing and tensing and relaxing. And in this way, you can manage that adrenaline and keep it from overwhelming you. So sometimes in that situation, you might have to tense and relax for 15 minutes. So I've done this at times when I was at some meeting at some point, I can't remember what it was, many years ago. And I wanted to ask a question. And I wasn't well known, and so for some reason the situation was scary. And so I was going to do this thing, and I was anxious, and so what I kept doing is I just kept tensing and relaxing, so I could keep my anxiety at a reasonable level. And I spit out my question, and I was done. So that's how we do it.
Okay, very good. So another question, when does competition in a relationship become unhealthy?
Competition in a relationship become unhealthy. Well, you mean, this is kind of that's a very interesting question. I would say that is something that if that's happening, what we have, it's one thing if it's a little bit friendly. So let's talk about competition and esteem processes and when it's working. So if you see a bunch of guys that are ribbing each other, then you can tell that they're actually, when they're competing in some ways, that there's a respect between them and that they're actually sort of enjoying the process. And in fact, men tend to be a lot rougher about this than women, by the way. And so that can be a problem if in a man-woman situation, the male is acting a little bit like a male, and he's almost morphing that relationship into a little bit of a buddy, at which point he can actually play a little too rough. There's guys that have just a little too much testosterone for their own good, and they can wind up being a little too competitive with their sweetheart. So that can happen, and that can be something that they need to be sensitive to. They're sort of, it's like a circuit is slipping, and they have slipped a part of that relationship into a competitive guy thing instead of a man-woman dynamic, which is a lot softer, or it should be. Now, if what we have is some there's competitions that are friendly and funny, but what's underneath that is going to be that there's a degree of esteem and a status between the two people that can't be touched by the vicissitudes of the competition. So that means that if you play cards together, you both really respect each other and love each other, but we can make fun of the fact that I beat you tonight, or you beat me last week, and I don't care because that didn't count. We can have that sort of a process, which is fine. But when the competition essentially gets, quote, serious, then that means that somebody is feeling like if they lose a competitive process in here, that they're actually losing real live esteem. And what that means is, it means that there's not sufficient security in the esteem signaling to actually protect them against the little phony bounces of esteem that come with competitive wins and losses within relationships. This is what I call, you can think about two people, 3 or 4 people in a group, and we're starting to rib one of them for fun, and then somebody makes a comment that has truth to it about a weakness, but it's too deep, and the feeling on the part of the receiver of that is, quote, that's not funny. Okay? It's only funny if we're not really touching the person's real status, that we're only touching what we're going to call faux status, or what floats on the surface of relationships. So if a relationship feels too competitive, it's because the competitive processes are actually reaching into the real status dynamics, and that's a problem. Then we need to talk about that really we can't do that in this relationship because the person is not secure enough that they're actually valued enough to warrant that kind of horseplay. Okay, so that's what I would tell people, and so that's when we have to put that away.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Lisle, we were talking a little while ago about a question that I had, and I'd like to ask it to you, but in a more generic way without giving any details. Are you okay with me asking?
Sure.
Okay. So the question is, what do you say to people that say that they eat, even if they eat very healthy food, let's say broccoli, and maybe beans, or something healthy, and they eat until they're full, and they eat more, and they think that they're eating because there is some kind of conflict and emptiness inside them, and they have to fill it with food. What do you say?
Yes, there's probably a lot I could say about this. So we can sort of begin at one end of this, and we'll work our way through some things. And if I get lost, bring me back to the point that I'm supposed to be on.
All right.
First of all, almost nobody behaves in this way at all. So when we see extraordinary volume eating in people, it's almost always behind highly palatable food, highly concentrated food. And there's a reason why that would be the case. The reason is that very rich food would have been a rare event in the Stone Age environment. And so as a result, it creates a ferocious eating behavior whenever that's available. So you know intuitively in a Stone Age environment that if there happens to be some rich food available, everybody's going to get to it, and they're going to get to it really fast. So you better get to it really fast. So there's a natural competitive game, a game set that sits inside the human mind that says, if this is available, if I start eating it and I'm aware that this is very rich food, I should better eat quickly and eat a lot. And so what people will do is they will ferociously eat large quantities of this, essentially eat all that you can get your hands on. because we may be 6 months before we see anything like this again in our village. So there's a ferocity to the eating of rich food, and you will eat right past normal satiation mechanisms, and you'll eat all the way into actual pain, which will eventually stop the eating behavior as you've essentially overfilled the stomach because it was a one-time chance. It's kind of like a tremendous sale at Macy's, like everything's 80% off, and you didn't plan to buy any new sweaters, but if they're 80% off, you're going to go, and you and everybody else is there, and they're ferociously grabbing everything in sight. That is exactly what that process is with very rich food. So it's even when there's nobody around, that circuit can still go off, and you can find yourself hogging and hoarding and eating all the way to the gills. So that is the normal process. That is 99% of what it is that we're talking about. Now, if someone were to ask me a question, yes, but I do that on alfalfa sprouts. First of all, never seen it. So the closest thing I've ever seen would be a few people that might do that on potatoes, something like that. This is rare, but I have seen it. And these are people that there aren't any underlying psychological conflicts. There may be some underlying unusual physiology where they may not have very good signaling from certain essentially receptors in their digestive tract. And who knows why? Could be genetic variation, which would be the most obvious first line answer. It could be that there's been damage to the circuits from some reason. Maybe they took psychiatric medications and it actually disturbed some of the neural circuitry in their head. Who knows? I have no idea what could be responsible for that, but it is very rare, and the answer is not an underlying psychological conflict. So when people are doing things that are very frustrating to them because they are doing things that they know are counterproductive for their goals. Sometimes they're very puzzled, and particularly with respect to dopamine stimulating behavior like alcohol, cigarettes, or eating rich food. These things are very frustrating for people because they want to stop them on the one hand, but on the other hand, they feel a compulsion to continue. The reason for that compulsion is not a deep underlying psychological conflict. The reason for that compulsion is that these substances are supernormal, and they are hyper signaling the dopamine pathway, and they are essentially telling the organism that if you get this substance, you are really successful biologically. So what you have is an extra emphatic signal of success. And so it is very difficult to learn your way around the fact that that is actually a false signal. That takes a lot of learning and a lot of practice and a lot of failure. And so, of course, it doesn't seem like that's what the problem is. It seems like the person has some nefarious counter-motivational self-destructive process that is going on. And the closest thing there is to that is I've talked about in my other webinars, the one earlier this year called the Slow Fast Way, and also in another lecture that I've done, which you can get on my website called The Continuum of Evil. In other words, there's a motivational dynamic of I quit, I don't care, I'm just going to go for broke. That I call the ego trap. That is a sort of deep self-destructive process, but that's not the normal fare for what's going on for most people. What's going on for most people is they may be puzzled by this dynamic that they have, that they cannot understand why it is that they always feel compelled to go for this rich food and that they eat too much of it and they eat all the way to where they're full, and yet they desperately want to lose weight, and for 5 days in a row they did a good job, and why do I blow it on Friday? The answer is that this is like an electromagnet. It keeps pulling you. It just keeps at you and keeps at you. It keeps telling you, this is where the high success is. This is where your biology is going to be best served. Come to where the rich food is. This is how we're going to reduce our likelihood of death by starvation. Those circuits were built into you over the millennia. They were shaped by a Stone Age environment of caloric scarcity, and as a result of that, they remain prominent in your mind. So this is why this is such a difficult process. There isn't some deep, bizarre, countervailing, psychodynamic reason why this is a problem. The reason is actually very straightforward, but that doesn't make it any easier.
Right. Thank you. You were saying earlier, I hear an echo, Dr. Lisle.
Yes.
I don't know if is it coming from your computer? Oh, it's fine now. Okay. I don't know. I'm sorry about that. So most psychiatrists do not really receive a lot of education in the field of psychology. Is that
right? Right. And so the field of psychiatry is, so if a person were to go to a psychiatrist and try to talk about this problem, it's very likely, and many psychologists as well, very likely that they would get what's called a psychodynamic explanation. So an explanation that would look for an early childhood situation that somehow seemed related to this problem. And this is a result of a misunderstanding as to the nature of how the human mind is constructed. And so so people very often, professionals in quotes, trying to help people, come up with explanations that sound satisfying and they sound like they might have truth in them. And the reason for this is a problem-solving device that sits inside the human mind that was described beautifully by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Daniel Kahneman is the only psychologist to ever win a Nobel Prize. Amos Tversky was his collaborator for their careers, and Amos Tversky has now passed away. But Tversky was at Stanford and Kahneman was at Berkeley, and they worked together for many years to actually discover the nature of a lot of the human problem-solving tricks, the cool ways that people come up with explanations to try to help them. So, for example, they find little biases inside those tricks. So, if you were to ask somebody how often do they think there was a car accident, they would give you a number. And yet, if they had just seen one yesterday, they're going to give you a number that's much higher. And this is what they call the availability heuristic. In other words, certain ideas you estimate based on your sort of local experience. And if we change that local experience, we can dramatically change what your conclusions are. We can also anchor your thinking. Like if I said, how much do you think that vase is? Do you think it's $200 or $100? You would then think somewhere in between. Whereas I said just anything, I really don't know. You would say probably 150. Whereas if I said, how much do you think that vase is? $15 or $30? You'd say, maybe 30. So I can anchor your thinking and cue you very quickly, and you will sort of follow suit to what the anchors are, which is a very interesting component of human problem solving that becomes very important in negotiation, particularly in big international contracts, etc. So a firm might ask for, well, we were thinking about 100 million. Well, the truth is they were thinking about 3 million, but they're trying to anchor the other side very high. Very tricky business. It turns out one of the more interesting heuristics that's in people's head is what we're going to call the representativeness heuristic. And that is when things seem like they're related. And it turns out that much of psychology has bought into using the representativeness heuristic in order to solve problems, and it turns out it's wrong. One of those things would be the notion that if you are eating a lot, you've got a hole in your soul. It's a superficial resemblance that makes sense semantically to the human mind, but it has absolutely nothing to do with how the human mind is constructed. So that concept that things are somehow semantically related was really essentially developed by the Freudians and 100 years ago. And Freud essentially elevated the representativeness heuristic to the level of a scientific principle. And it turns out it's nothing of the kind. It's a trick that sits inside the human mind and can trip us into thinking that certain solutions make a lot of sense. So one of the most absurd things that you'll see in psychology that's related to this idea is the notion that if a person draws a picture of a house, they're drawing a picture of themselves. And so if they don't put a fireplace on it, as I learned in grad school from my psychodynamic professor, that means that the house that they grew up in didn't have psychological warmth. And at which point I said, yes, but I grew up in Southern California. Oh, well, it's different if you're in Florida. So anyway, these are many of these things. And so unfortunately, you know, I don't really want to wax on this, but this is such a common misunderstanding in the psychology of people trying to figure out why it is that they're struggling with this problem. So people come up, and experts come up with endless permutations of psychodynamic explanations for these problems, and they've all wandered in way into the weeds, and they're not looking in the right place. We look in the right place for the notion that the organism was designed with a chip that says eat the richest food. Okay, once we see that, when you come along as a human and we educate you with a little bit more, and we say, oh, guess what? You can't trust that. You can't trust the main device for your eating decisions throughout the entire natural history of this organism. You cannot trust that. Believe me, what I'm telling you is you shouldn't eat the richest thing. You should eat the least richest thing. Well, folks, that is not a lesson that's easily learned. That is like moving your hand forward when the guy hits it with his hammer instead of pulling it away. Okay, so to get out of this trap requires tremendous diligence. It requires a control over your environment, so we're not exposed to a lot of these rich foods and these choices all the time, so that we keep our palates clear enough that we're reasonably happy with healthy food. But the lure of the supernormal food is always there, and it's always a trap waiting to be sprung. And so that's what makes this a difficult sort of lifelong journey.
Right, right. Well, thank you. Very, very good insight. As usual, you, Dr. Lisle, well, to me, you are the genius, okay? You are in that category, and I know a lot of people here agree with me. Okay, thank you. I'm going to start calling you genius.
No, that's just spent a lot of time reading. That's
okay.
all.
All right. Well, okay, here we have a question about, okay, it goes like this. Am I addicted or just weak? If I get it out of my system and stop eating it, I'm fine. If I have one single serving of some kind of vegan baked good, I fall off the wagon for days or weeks. Why does this happen?
Yes, it happens because your mind is running a cost-benefit analysis on what decisions you should make. And that cost-benefit analysis relies a great deal on memory. And so if you have not eaten any rich foods for a while, you have a significant decay in your imagery as to how valuable it's going to taste and feel. And so this is the equivalent of, as I tell people, if you watched Gone with the Wind for the first time yesterday, you're thinking about it all day, and you can hear the music, and you're crying, you know, at some of the scenes in your head. In other words, it's very emotionally impactful because it's vivid, okay? But if we don't talk to you about this, and then we talk to you about a year later, and I say, well, how was Gone with the Wind? Have you ever seen it? Oh, yeah, I saw it. What'd you think of it? Oh, it was really good. Okay, well, tell me about it. Well, you can tell me about some of the scenes, but the vividness is all gone, and you may not remember the theme song. And so as a result, though, if I play you the theme song, some of that emotion is going to come back, because now we are hitting the sensory receptors directly. And so now you might have some more impactful memories. So, but the point is that the day after, you'd be obsessed with it. You'd have all these images in your head. They would be really vivid, very impactful for your emotional process in the next day. And so that's exactly what's happening with some kind of rich food. So if you haven't had any for 2 weeks, then it's faded from memory, and it's not making that big of an impact on you. So therefore, it isn't calling to you nearly as hard. But if you have some today, then I guarantee you that tomorrow you're in trouble, because now it's really vivid. Gone with the Wind is playing in your head all day long, and you're thinking about, oh boy, that'd be nice to go down to Starbucks and have some of that, or whatever it is. And so then you go down again, and what happens? Then you set it up for the next day. That's why healthy living is very often streaky. Okay, it's like streak shooting. You might do really well for 7 days in a row, and then you're a mess for 2 weeks, and then you grind through the process. What we have to know is when you sort of cheat your program and you wander into the weeds, you need to know that you've got a couple of tough days ahead of you to pull out. So the first day is going to be the hardest. The second day will be the second hardest. The third day won't be that bad. And the fourth day will be okay. And that's sort of how it works. And that's why this person is having the problem they're having. It's the same problem everybody has.
Right, right.
Yes.
And Dr. Lisle, what do you say about, well, some other doctors recommend that besides the diet, the change in diet, a person should be doing some physical exercise, and that meditation is a very important piece of the puzzle. What do you have any point of view about meditation in particular? Because one of the questions is about that.
Some people benefit a great deal from meditation, and a lot of people don't. I think the people that benefit from meditation tend to be people that are sort of very obsessive and hyper-conscientious by nature, and have a lot of, their minds are very busy, and they are constantly sort of circling around, feeling halfway guilty and imagining the worst case scenario, etc. And essentially they can't settle down and relax. They're like a very skittish horse, and that's just how they are. And so people like that, I think, often will benefit considerably from meditative practice. A lot of people don't carry that kind of stress, and so they're going to find that a meditative practice is completely unnecessary, and it just has nothing to do with their personality. So that I have not seen that discussion in meditative literature, particularly the notion that there's enormous personality differences in people, and that for some people meditation would be a joke. It's like, why bother? I'm perfectly relaxed. There's no real reason for me. I don't get that worked up over anything, and there's no real point to it. But the point is for people who spin, for people who are hyper-conscientious and have a hard time letting their minds sort of settle down and relax, I think it could be a useful thing. I'm not sure how useful it is with respect to dietary behavior, etc. But it can be useful. It can be a life benefit, and some people will report that it's a very nice thing for them. It helps them put a little layer between themselves and their anxiety to essentially. It's almost like it's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a wound. That the personality of hyper-conscientiousness can be like a wound that's very, very sensitive. If you touch it, it hurts. But if you put a bandage on it and you touch it, it doesn't hurt nearly as much. It's a little bit of distance between themselves and their own hyper-conscientiousness, and as a result, that can be useful for some people. Now, in terms of exercise, exercise is a different matter entirely, and that is that exercise is beneficial for everybody. It's a useful way. Not only is it necessary to optimize many bodily functions, it's also true. It's very useful mentally. That this is a very nice sort of stress relief process that will take place, and it's also for people that are particularly working on their health. It's a very useful support for your self-esteem, as this is one thing that if you do this in a given day, you can't give it back, and that's why I consider this to be a cornerstone of self-esteem support when a person is trying to do diet and lifestyle changes, because you can do a good job all day on your diet, and then you can blow it with a bunch of tofuti cuties at midnight. And then you can feel disgusted with yourself and you want to kick over the table and just quit the whole thing. But if you exercise that day, you did not give it back. So that's the beauty, is that your own internal audience that's watching you and sort of judging your performance will know that if you did a good job exercising, you did a good job exercising. So if you didn't do such a great job holding your diet together, okay, I didn't do such a great job, but I absolutely exercised. And that winds up being an internal support for people trying to pursue better life.
Right. Okay, thank you. One of our viewers here has an interesting question. When will the doctors and researchers involved in the plant-based movement take a stand and sue the cattle and dairy industries and sue Congress for perpetuating the lie that meat and dairy is healthy, and that those two industries are, in fact, causing illness. Class action lawsuit?
Yeah, that's somebody that thinks big, and we're not that big and fancy. It wouldn't surprise me that someday somebody may take action on some of this. PCRM certainly looks for angles where people can be sued and people can be challenged, and they feel like they have very good legal angle on a specific issue. But I hear the person's frustration. But the truth is that we certainly have freedom in this country, and one of the great things about freedom is that you are free to do self-destructive things. And so you are free to smoke and drink and eat terribly and do all kinds of things that are self-destructive and etc. So this is and that's fine. The problem is obviously when authoritative agencies or suppliers of these things actively lie and about evidence, for example, or involved in shaping evidence in a way that favors themselves, and they are misrepresenting science. Those are the places that we would be looking to sue. Very difficult to do, but it is possible, and I think those angles will always be, somebody will always be looking for those angles.
Right. Dr. Lisle, a question here. It's intriguing to me because I've never really heard anybody talk about this, so I'll go ahead and ask you.
Yes.
Does Dr. Lisle have any comments on the phenomenon of derealization and or disembodiment, both of which can be very unpleasant experiences?
Yeah, those are very unusual experiences that occasionally an individual may have, and that's something that doesn't really pertain to our broad audience here. Those are rare, usually short-term psychiatric bizarre events, and they are what they are. Usually they're basically self-correcting, but what they are is they're funny little neural circuits that your mind is the most complex mechanism in the known universe. If we take it independent of your body, where the mind is included, but the mind itself is the most complex thing that we know that exists. And extremely complicated things usually don't run perfectly. So you can ask Bill Gates. Okay, when you get a complicated software problem, there's problems with it. And when you get a complicated device, the human mind is extraordinarily complex. It's trying to essentially build a model of reality in your own head. So it uses extraordinary devices in order to have you understand the nature of reality, and it builds that thing inside your head. That's why you've got memories where you can conjure up what your bedroom looks like right now, and you're not there. That's a remarkable device that can do this. I can conjure up what John McDougall looks like and what he sounds like right as we're talking right here. And so this is that device has limitations, and sometimes it will slip a cog for a little bit, and that will happen, and so people will have some unusual experiences, and they can be disturbing because it's disturbing. It's kind of like if your car ever stalls in the middle of an intersection. You're like, wait a second, this is a problem. Maybe the only time it ever did it, but then you're kind of nervous about it forever. And so this is just sort of a strange and unusual experience that a very few people will sometimes have.
Right. All right, thank you. So here's a question that has a lot of drama to it, so I like it.
Yes, okay.
So please ask Dr. Lisle to discuss getting back on track after spectacularly falling off the wagon with detailed specificity. It is a particularly germane topic during the holiday season, full of rich forbidden foods. So I liked it because a person says spectacularly falling off, and I thought, well, if you're going to fall off, just do it in a spectacular way.
Yes, there's two things. Usually if you fall off spectacularly, it's because this is a reaction to the ego trap. So you may want to go back and look at the previous webinar called The Slow Fast Way, because what's happened is you got expectations too high for yourself, and then if you fall off spectacularly, there's a moment as you start to fall off track where you essentially are trying to display to yourself that you are really not trying. So you're trying to display this to your internal audience. So for people that have not heard this before, that's sort of a key webinar. It's the Slow Fast Way, where I delineate that essentially there's three major components to the human mind. There's you, there is an esteem meter or a mechanism that is sensitive to esteem signals from other people, that you are largely dictates your happiness. In other words, if other people are welcoming and praising and giving you good feedback, then that creates happiness. If they are rejecting and giving you negative feedback, then that creates depression or sadness or anxiety. And then the third component of the mind is going to be what I call the internal audience. This is a facsimile of the real people in your life. It's an audience that resides in you and essentially watches you. And it gives feedback to your esteem meter, just like real live people give feedback to your esteem meter. And when those internal audience gives you feedback to esteem meter, it's because it's watching you when nobody else is watching. So you can imagine someone that is painting a painting in their basement, and they can see that they have worked very hard and done their very best at this painting. And when they're looking at the painting emerge, their internal audience says to their esteem meter, wow, this is really great. And you feel pride. So pride comes from the internal audience observing you, even if nobody else is around, okay? You can also feel pride if other people say, well done, in the same way. So either way, that pride mechanism can go off. But one of the things that will happen is if expectations are too high for us, and we cannot match the expectations of other people, then very often what we will do is make sure that we do not, that they can see that we are not trying. So if an athlete is thought that he can break 10 flat on a 100-yard dash, but he's pretty sure he can't. So he's pretty sure he's secretly run that race a few times, and he knows that he can only run 10.3. But in his little arena, everybody thinks he's so blazing fast that he could surely run under 10 flat. So it's going to turn out that he will make sure that if those people are around that believe in him, he'll make sure that he indicates that he's not trying that hard. And this is a self-handicapping mechanism. This is the great student who's expected to get perfect SAT scores will make sure they get drunk the night before the SAT and display that they, whatever their performance is, it's an underestimate of the truth. This is what people will do, however, from the perspective of their own internal audience. Their internal audience sometimes has the expectations too high. So a person expects that they're going to keep on a really healthy track, they intend to do this, but the pleasure trap gets them. They start to get the feedback from supernormal stimuli. They recognize they're not going to probably hold it together. And so what they do right in front of their own internal audience is eat the whole pizza. Okay, so I'll show you. I'm really not trying. So you can't judge how well I could regulate this problem because I'm absolutely not trying. That is a spectacular belly flop. So usually when it is spectacular, it has that aspect in it, that we are showing our own self that we are not trying. This is a really, this is the, quote, dynamic underpinning of self-destructive behavior in human beings, is this process. So after you've done this, if a torrent of self-destruction took hold behind this, the job is to realize you're only a few days away from the internal audience respecting you. Now, it's not going to respect you in the morning. Okay? It is not going to come back the next morning. And even if you start to do a good job, it's going to essentially say, I don't trust you. I don't think that you can hold it together. As it should. So it's essentially giving you a report on what reputation it is that you've earned. But the truth of the matter is you can earn a pretty good reputation with your own internal audience pretty quickly, much more quickly than you think. And that's how we get back on track after a spectacular flop.
All right, and talking about the slow fast way, didn't we also do a webinar on the slow fast way?
Yes, we did a webinar. That's what I want people to watch.
Right, I think that is on drmcdougall's.com website and the webinar, but it's probably on your website as well, don't you think?
Not on my website yet.
So I was right. So it's on Dr. McDougall's website. When you go there, there is under education, you can click there and you can get to the webinar page, and then you can find it. So that's what I suggest. Now, Dr. Lisle, you do have a website that is called esteemdynamics.org, right?
Right.
Okay. And that I'm putting here on the screen so that people can visit it, because you also have some videos there and, and a way to get in touch with you for a 30-minute session or something like that, if people want to do a phone session, or I don't know if you do it in person.
No, we just do by phone or by Skype.
Very good. I cannot recommend that high enough, everyone. Take 30 minutes or so and get a session with Dr. Lisle. Dr. Lisle, we're getting close to the end of our webinar today, but let me ask you one question that someone posted regarding actually the slow fast way.
Yes.
And this person says, my question for Dr. Lisle is, how do you apply the slow fast way and wrapping the myelin sheath to losing weight? Please connect the last few dots for me.
Yes. There would be several little ways that weight loss would be associated with wrapping the myelin sheath in terms of weight loss, but it's not the way that probably the person is hoping. So they're probably hoping that there's a way that somehow we wrap myelin sheath around healthy food, and then we don't like the other food. That will never happen. The wrapping the myelin sheath, for people that have not heard me speak on this, which was another webinar we did called Dare to Be Lousy, where I talk about the wrapping of the myelin sheath. This is essentially the way we change the structure of the mind to build skill. And the myelin sheath is a mechanism by which the brain changes itself and essentially canalizes certain behaviors as they get much more efficient. So the things we want to do to get efficient is that we want to essentially, for example, get very competent in our kitchen of making 8 or 10 things that we're going to eat a lot of. As we do that, we are wrapping the myelin sheath at literally the movements. So if you go into a sandwich shop, you can, which I do, so I'll eat a sandwich over here locally that's a healthy sandwich. I can immediately tell someone who's worked there for a few months versus someone who's just started in the last week. I can watch the fact that the person who's just started is fumbling around and doesn't know where things are and isn't very good with the knife, and they're having to consciously work through all these alternatives, and the electricity is leaking all over their brain as they make movements that are not efficient. They haven't myelinated the process. Okay, so in order to be Michelangelo, you had to carve over and over and over again and carve certain shapes, and so you had to learn how to do this. So he couldn't have done David until he had done thousands of other little statues where he knew how to carve what looked like a human arm muscle. Had to do that over and over again. To do weight loss, we have to canalize for certain movements, but they are very efficient. We've done them over and over again in our own kitchen, and we've created this food, and we're very fast and capable at it. That is how we reduce the cost of it's involved in the cost-benefit analysis of this behavior. We get the cost down, the benefit stays the same, and this enables us to compete in the cost-benefit analysis about alternative decisions for eating that we would have done. And so that is the story of the myelin sheath and this problem, and unfortunately, there's no myelin that will defend us from the pleasure trap. That can't happen, and that's a battle we're going to do the whole way out.
Someone is asking if the myelin sheath is associated somehow with MS.
Yes, Yes, so multiple sclerosis is a disease that unwraps or attacks the myelin sheath, and that's why people with MS will lose motor control because they're actually, the electricity is leaking to nearby neurons, and then it's activating muscles that they don't want to activate. And so that's what MS effectively is the attack of the myelin sheath. And so your skill development, when you're watching skills of any kind, you're watching the evidence of myelin sheath. So if you see Carlos Santana play the guitar, you are actually observing electricity going through his brain and the motor areas of the brain, and they are not leaking to nearby neurons so that the muscles will fire only in the way that they need to and not in ways that they don't need to. Whereas an early guitar player, you'll see them fumble as essentially energy is being leaked all over the place. So if you see Gustavo play the piano, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. That is years and years of wrapping the myelin sheath so that he can play that way. And you need to be a little bit like that in your own kitchen so that we can produce healthy meals simply, easily, and quickly without very much cognitive or muscular effort. Get them on the table in front of us so that we can have the life you deserve.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Lisle. Another very, very pleasant webinar with you today. And we won't see you until 2017.
Right.
So, I want to wish you a wonderful holiday season and Happy New Year.
You too, and good luck to everybody out there, and do a good job. And remember, the rule number one of healthy living in the holiday environment is whatever you're going to eat something healthy.
Right. Well, thank you again, and we'll see you soon. Thank you everyone for logging in.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.